Yo, welcome back to Wales in the Movies and Cymru Reviews. It's been a while since I've made one of these reviews. They're getting harder to do, but like Dr. Ian Malcolm said, life found a way. And today we're looking at a film which is important not just in the history of Welsh film, TV and drama, but also for the history of Wales itself. I'm talking about 1992's HEDD WYN, starring Llwyd and Sue Roderick.
Dwi'n gwybod pwy ydych chi? Elis yr ysgol.
Os ydy'r barl sy'n dwyn y ffug enw Fleur de Lis yn bresennol,
Os bu rai...
Fydd y gyd drosodd cyn i brodi, Telsi.
A dy gerddi di'r fath o ddebau ti, Elis. Ar wasgar am obman. Mi allai dy flerwch di gostio'r gystadleuaeth i ti.
I'm here on behalf of the War Office.
He is a farmer. We can't do without him. Ti'n real cachgi yn syd.
So I don't think I could kill anyone.
So, you would stand back and watch your family being murdered by Germans, would you?
Ignorant Welsh peasant!
Dwi eisiau mynd at y Elis ddim.
J.J. Williams isio dy gadeirio di dyn a'ch di o gora. It's a poem, sir. They won't accept it if it's late. You've got to send it immediately.
The 38th Welsh Division will have the honour to be in the front line at the big battle of the war.
HEDD WYN premiered on the 8th of August 1992 at the Edinburgh Film Festival before its broadcast on the 1st of November 1992, which was the 10th birthday of S4C, the Welsh language channel. It didn't receive a cinematic release in Wales or the wider UK, but did in American cinemas in 1996, 2 years after it became the first British film nominated in the foreign language category at the Academy Awards in 1994. On a side note, the film was also shown at the London Film Festival, and the writer and director were invited to London to receive the Audience Award. On arrival, they were told that in fact the film had not won the award as they had originally been informed. HEDD WYN has a large but mainly unknown cast, most of whom can only be found on Welsh language TV to this day. It stars Ynys Mon's Llwyd as the titular character, aka Elis Evans, a farmer's son and shepherd who through his poetry and death became a Welsh folk hero and legend. As is the norm for us in English-speaking monoglot Wales, it's a story I was not familiar with until I started to research our history on screen. But objectively, and all Welshness aside, it's a story which was, and I think still is, begging to be made into a big-budget feature film. HEDD WYN is written by Llwyd and directed by Paul Turner, jointly produced by S4C and Peindafig. First of all, let's look at the setup and the world of the film. It's 1913. Elis Evans works and lives with his family in the village of Trawsfynydd in Gwynedd. He composes poetry for the local Eisteddfod, and in an early scene we learn that he has won a local competition in Pwllheli and that this is not his first victory. For newcomers, an Eisteddfod is a Welsh festival of music, dance and poetry, a tradition which goes back perhaps as far as 800 years. At these Eisteddfodau, a chair is awarded to the best poet or musician, as we see in this early scene where Ellis is chaired under his bardic name, HEDD WYN.
HEDD WYN.
In Wales and its sister Brythonic cultures in Cornwall and Brittany, it's traditional that poets, or bards, take a pseudonym. In the English language, HEDD WYN translates as either blessed peace or quite literally white peace. Ellis helps his friend win a village poetry competition to win 5 shillings so that they can buy beer, and at this local ceremony we meet Lizzie Roberts. Lizzie is older than Ellis, but it's clear they're already having an affair. We see Ellis writing poetry but is disturbed by the firing range that has been installed in the hills near his home. His friend and aspiring Reverend, William, asks to see the poem he's composing for the National Eisteddfod and tells him that his work has passion that is rarely found in the more educated poets, but his ill discipline and womanising will cost him the national prize. Ellis says he has no chance of winning the big national as his language is not scholarly enough. He also reminds William that his poetic passion is fueled by romance, not hindered by it. It's now 1914 and the spectre of war creeps into the film. An Anglican minister gives a passionate sermon demanding the young men enlist in the British Army to fight the war. William is disgusted and labels the minister a disgrace to his calling. Yet, Ellis' other friends are clearly excited to enlist and do their bit to help the cause of the Great War. William tells Ellis that this year's Eisteddfod in Bangor has been cancelled due to the conflict in Europe, and as a reaction to his lack of commitment, Lizzie starts to resent Ellis' pacifism and labels him a coward. She rejects his olive branch, and that night, as the locals sing Welsh folk songs in the pub, the mood is altered as a local man starts singing a jingoistic British Army song, and as Lizzie enters the pub with an English soldier on her arm, Ellis sings over the man with the Welsh hymn Myfanwy, a song about a woman's betrayal.
Setting the lady. Welsh bastard!
Elsewhere, the army begin to take notice of the Evans family farm, sending conscription officers to the house and eventually deciding that the farm doesn't need 2 male workers and demanding one of their male sons join the fight on the fields of France. Ellis is left with the choice of fighting himself or seeing his youngest brother Bob, still a child, go in his place.
Hen, paid â siarad y wirion i di. Ni dechrau byw to.
HEDD WYN is a proper film of scope, loaded with integrity, symbolism, and absolutely something that should have got a much wider cinematic release. It's one of the best films ever to be made in Wales, and to review it, we need to look at the film's writer, Llwyd, and his relationship with director, the late Paul Turner. Llwyd was brought up on the HEDD WYN story and spent a lot of time as a kid with his grandfather, who was a strong pacifist, and central to this pacifism were the stories of not just HEDD WYN, but others from the area who lost their lives fighting a war they had no understanding of. Despite the film's culturally well setting, the motivation for telling this story is a humanist and not a nationalist one. It's a film about contrasts, but the script is careful not to expand on a Wales versus England theme nationally or linguistically, choosing instead to comment on the injustice and futility of war and the theme of creativity versus destruction. There are scenes and images which may approach this problem of Britishness, and we'll go over that tension towards the later part of the review. This was Llwyd's first spec script. He sent it over to S4C, who gave the green light immediately on first reading. He was then paired with the Cornish director Paul Turner and was told that Paul had something of a difficult reputation. Llwyd and Turner had never met, but Alan had heard of Paul due to some of the work he had previously done for S4C, such as TV films like Becca and Siskel. These two men got on well, and this contributed to a film which knew exactly what it wanted to say. Paul Turner had started out as an assistant film editor at the BBC, but was silently blacklisted by the corporation, as a dangerous radical, dissident and subversive. This was due not only to a brief membership of the Communist Party, but also the false rumour that Turner was part of a plan by Cymdeithas i'r Iaith, the Welsh Language Society, to take over BBC Wales Studios in Cardiff in 1973, when he was an assistant film editor there. Paul was a key member of the Welsh cooperative Taliesin, who provided much of the early products for S4C after its birth in 1982, and some rare Welsh films in the 1980s and 90s. One of the founders of Taliesin, Colin Thomas, collaborated with some students from Aberystwyth University on a short film about Turner's blacklisting, and I've put a link to that work in the description section. Paul Turner passed away in 2019, aged 73. There can be many reasons for HEDD WYN never being commercially released in UK cinemas. At this point, it's worth mentioning that the BBC and other TV companies at the time used to shoot a lot of their dramas, particularly anything set outdoors, on film, as opposed to shooting on video. In this era, TV was the natural home for many British productions which were bona fide films, and this is especially true in the history of Welsh drama. Rather than cinema, the majority of Welsh drama made from the 1970s onwards right through to the 1990s was either made with a TV audience in mind or evidently could only find a home on TV. At the end of the day, I just don't think the majority of British filmgoers will even consider watching a Welsh language movie. You can put HEDD WYN with a list of other Welsh dramas before or since that is not commercially available, hard to purchase or never shown on UK TV. Works often played to enthusiastic audiences in international film festivals, but this rarely, if ever, led to commercial cinematic release or success. However, HEDD WYN did win the Royal Television Society's Best Drama Award, but is a film mostly written and shot with a cinema audience in mind. When given the chance to shine, working with contrasts and light, the cinematography by Welsh regular Ray Orton is beautifully rich and wide in scope, definitely made for a big screen and a dark theatre. Also, the themes of the story are those to which cinema is more suited. It's clear that Alan Llwyd envisioned a cinematic audience experience when writing the script. Paul Turner elicits authentic, understated performances from the cast. Hugh Garmon is perfect in the title role. Sue Roderick nails her character's dark side, and I particularly like Judith Humphreys as Jeannie and Kelly Cunnington as Bob. Sue Roderick, who was in a relationship with Paul Turner at the time, is the only one who went on to feature in many more Welsh films. Unfortunately, Paul Turner, who had considerable talent and a sympathetic Welsh nationalism, didn't go on to have the career his potential promised, making only a few more TV films, all in Wales, the last being Wild Justice in 1994. The music for HEDD WYN is by John Hardy, who also scored Leaving Lennon in 1988 and can still be found working to this day on Welsh TV such as Hinterland and Hidden, and even contributed to the score for Gareth Evans' brutal Netflix film Apostle in 2018. HEDD WYN was edited by Chris Lawrence, who had previously made Grand Slam, The Angry Earth and Un Nos o Lleiad, Leaving Lenin and British star vehicle Disaster Rancid Aluminium. The editing for HEDD WYN is technically on point. There's not one frame too many or too few. The only issues I have from an editor's perspective need to be put in with other more general observations about the film. Let me be clear, this is a constructive criticism of HEDD WYN, written by me, an English-speaking monoglot from the south, raised on action entertainment and genres like science fiction and war films. It's possibly the case that for first or second language Welsh users, the experience of HEDD WYN would be different. The chief reasons I mention this relate to the film's structure, editing and use of language. HEDD WYN is the story of a Welsh language poet and a rare example of a film made entirely in Cymraeg, so I hesitate to make these observations, but anyway, bear with me and I'd be interested to hear what you think. Let's look at structure and editing. The first edits are, of course, made in the writing room. HEDD WYN begins on the battlefield in 1917, with Ellis lying fatally injured. The story then flashes back 2 years. It's a bit of dramatic irony at the beginning of the film and is a technique these days called how we got here, which you can find in a lot of mainstream movies. Frequently it seems used in biopics, but I'm not sure this entirely works here because the narrative then keeps flashing forward to this moment throughout the film. The technique is central to its structure, but I feel it compromises tension and a sense of jeopardy. Why I believe that HEDD WYN's story is still appropriate to a bigger budget tale is that it contains a ready-made archetype. Will Ellis' poem be submitted in time for the National Eisteddfod before he's sent to his death? In other words, will Cinderella make it to the ball? This figurative ticking clock is what many screenwriters struggle to manufacture, yet HEDD WYN's story comes ready-made with it, and I feel that it could have been used a lot more in this film. As a consumer of mainstream genre drama, I would be interested to see HEDD WYN as a linear tale with more jeopardy, stakes, and yes, action. In terms of the action and war scenes, they're atmospheric and evocative, and I would have liked to have spent more time there. It's also when John Hardy's musical score comes into its own and allows the emotions to cut loose. Considering the film's budget of £600,000, it makes Turner and Ray Orton's achievements here even more remarkable. These are observations rather than criticisms, but other points I wish to raise surround the Welsh language. Yes, I'm gonna go there. These flash forwards are free of dialogue but contain Ellis' poetry in voiceover. These scenes for me get confusing, and I'm not sure if, as a non-Welsh user, the film's better viewed without the subtitles, because I kind of feel a little bit excluded and confused at these moments. The problem is that in a film about a poet, English monoglots are denied the extra layers of meaning in the original Cymraeg. It's easier to get profoundly lost in translation with poetry than any other form of writing. I'm not sure if there's a way around that in a film about a Welsh language poet, but the effect on me of all these layers is that it becomes more a cerebral experience than an emotional one, which the story is at its heart. There's also a similar problem with the film's opening titles. It's an inventive way to open a story, that's for sure, and quite intriguing. As the camera glides over the darkly lit bardic chair, the archdruid can be heard calling the winning poet, who goes by the name Fleur-de-Lis. And I can't help thinking that a non-Welsh speaker who didn't already know the story of HEDD WYN would be getting a little bit confused by this point, as we're now watching a biopic of a man who has 3 names in 2 or 3 different languages, and we're only 1 minute into the film. In terms of screenwriting, this is similar, if not exactly the same, as a concept raised in Blake Snyder's screenwriting book Save the Cat, and he calls it double mumbo jumbo. Made simple, it means audiences hearing too many previously unknown concepts. Welsh poets had bardic names, okay? Ellis Evans' bardic name is HEDD WYN, right? Okay, we're still with you. HEDD WYN wrote his poem under the French pseudonym Fleur-de-Lis. Okay, now maybe I'm getting a little bit distracted and confused.
And this bit at the end's in French. Fleur-de-Lis.
That's my nom de plume, sir.
Nom de plume. You're beginning to confuse me with your French, Welsh and German. I'll have to give this careful consideration.
Ellis Evans was a romantic pacifist who dreamt of winning the National Poets Prize, but was drafted in to fight the Great War against his will and died before winning his life's dream. There is the story, and it would be interesting to see a film which sticks strictly to this emotional journey. For example, Ellis' many girlfriends are true to his backstory and motivation, but they don't justify their screen time. One clever change the film does make is the relationship between Ellis and his brother Bob. In real life, There was never any thought that Bob would go to war and Ellis would stay. But Llwyd and Turner are canny to create this conflict, as it adds drama, character and jeopardy where perhaps none existed in the real-life events. It also helps comment on the deep divisions that the Great War conflict created within families themselves and in Welsh nonconformist Christian communities. The opposite example of this in HEDD WYN is not the inclusion of the many love interests, but the moment where Ellis gets sent home to spend time with his family. Yes, this actually happened, but putting this into the story compromises the drama and kills the tension. I feel once HEDD WYN is sent to France to face a likely death, that's where he should spend the rest of the story. In Portuguese, the film is called The Armageddon Poet. This, to me, sounds like a more accessible and enticing title than HEDD WYN, which gives non-Welsh viewers nothing really to work with. On that note, my personal motivation for making this channel is to see Wales increase its global profile by selling stories to the world. I recognise the immense cultural value of films such as HEDD WYN, but I think its lack of commercial cinematic success demonstrates that it doesn't reach to cater for a mass audience. Can Welsh language films ever satisfy such an audience? Well, of course, I think it's possible. There are examples of many independent foreign language films which hit globally and gain large fan bases, and a key element to achieving that, I believe, is to make identifiable visual stories focusing on primal themes and goals. On that note, HEDD WYN is admirably and ultra-restrained in its depiction of the Welsh versus English theme. Llwyd and Turner dial back the overt nationalism and focus instead on the contrast of creativity versus destruction, pacifism versus militarism. It's subtly done. While I would normally want to see as much conflict as possible on screen between British and English power and Welsh resistance, World War I is not an appropriate setting to tell such a story. Yes, there are plenty of scenes and images which comment on what are essentially two very different nationalisms, but these are not made a focal point, and most importantly, the audience are not told or lectured these ideas. We are shown them, and they're not dwelt on. As for locations, HEDD WYN is shot all in Wales and mainly near real-life events, near Trawsfynydd in Gwynedd. HEDD WYN is not easy to pick up on DVD, but does exist in print, even available in a box set somewhere with other Welsh films of the era. The disc has no special features and may not even carry English subtitles, another example of the neglect that sometimes exists for our production. If you can find them, there are a couple of extras doing the rounds online which will contextualise HEDD WYN's story. Recommended is Ifor ap Glyn's BBC documentary, The Lost War Poet, which I found essential in writing this review. You can also find S4C coverage of the HEDD WYN crew at the Oscars here on YouTube. One of the frustrating aspects of the famed Oscar nomination is Anthony Hopkins when introducing the film to the Los Angeles crowd.
Farewell, my concubine. Chief Whowas, director. The United Kingdom, South Wales, my home country, HEDD WYN, Paul Turner, director. From Vietnam.
Wales is not Korea, and South Wales is not a country. Also, the film was written about and starring people from the north. Stuff like this really doesn't help when it comes to obscuring Welsh nationhood overseas. The story of how the film got nominated is an odd but amusing one. It appears the only reason the film received its nomination was the efforts of one man, namely Gwilym Hughes, who was a film buff from the north who is actually in the Guinness Book of Records for watching so many movies. After receiving a reply to his written letter to the Academy, Gwilym started a one-man campaign to get HEDD WYN a nomination, and were it not for the efforts of this one man, the film would have remained internationally anonymous, as the Academy apparently, at a later date, were open about their ignorance of Wales and Welsh language film. This is a perfect example of something I talk about a lot on this channel. In Wales, with such scant national institutions and representation, ordinary people are often needed to make a difference representing Wales down there on the ground. The existence of the channel serves as another example of that. So to my Patreons, subscribers, and in this case, the late Gwilym Hughes, da iawn diolch. Gwilym died in 2010, a few months after another notable expert on Welsh film, Mr. David Berry. Overall, Wales in the Movies grades this film at 77%. Whatever your personal reaction to the story's treatment, HEDD WYN is a cogent and unique film, and the cultural history of Wales is significantly richer for its existence. As David Berry wrote in Wales and Cinema, HEDD WYN is the perfect example of a screenwriter and director working together as one. Big thanks to Llwyd, screenwriter and HEDD WYN's biographer, for partaking in a small interview with me for the purposes of Cymru Views. Like I say, it's been nearly 2 years since I've been able to make one of these. They're getting harder and more complicated to do with life getting in the way. But Wales in the Movies is now on Patreon, so if you could consider having a look at the website and maybe even a tiny monthly donation to Wales in the Movies, and subscribing to the channel, of course, it would certainly help increase the regularity and the quality of the content I'm able to put out. Until then, if you've got any suggestions for the next episode of Cymru Views, which I'm hoping, but not promising, will be in the next few months, I haven't yet decided which film I'd like to observe, which film I'd like to critique next from a very Welsh perspective, of course. Any ideas on that would be greatly appreciated. Diolch.